Welcome everybody. My name is Tom Simmons and today we're going to be talking through object strategies, Archicad, and real-time rendering. For those of you who are new, we will be taking questions during the course of this webinar. If you have any questions, please feel free to enter those questions into the control panel and we will review those questions at the end of the webinar. So this will be our agenda for today. We're first going to cover a review of objects with BIM and real-time rendering. We'll talk a little bit about Archicad and Twinmotion, object and model import options for Archicad, as well as for Twinmotion, and also additional import options using ModelPort. We'll review several sources for objects, focusing on design libraries, BIM resources, and rendering focused object resources. And then we're going to talk a little bit about object optimization and management. We'll review importing into Archicad, including planar and curved objects, editing objects and converting to morphs. We'll then review ModelPort add-on to Archicad, including creating clean 2D symbols, editing and customizing materials, visibility management, reducing object polygon count, and file size management. And finally, we'll review Twinmotion in terms of importing to the library, resizing and moving objects, and organizing with containers. So I'll start with just kind of an overview of objects in relationship to BIM and real-time rendering. So when you're talking about Archicad and Twinmotion, you're really talking on the one side about the BIM model and on the other side about a rendering model. So on the BIM model side, we are talking about using objects for the focus of design, modeling, and documentation. And then on the rendering side for visualization and entourage. And so today I'm going to kind of, if you think about it in those respects, that's how I'm going to focus the topic today. Because objects, when you're trying to select objects for the BIM part of the process, it's important to select objects based upon how are they going to be viewed and are they going to be used in your documentation. How are they going to be used for information management that you might need in the course of the project, for specifications, for schedules, etc. And then, of course, for modeling and for various aspects of the BIM process. The rendering tends to be more geared toward visualization and entourage, and we'll talk about those differences. So first, let's talk about the different formats that we can access through each of these options. First, in Archicad, if we want to bring in objects, those objects will tend to be objects that are converted from either DWG, IFC, SketchUp, Rhino, 3D, Collada, DAE, stereolithography, and then also Cinema 4D. This would be available if you've added on the Goodies add-on, which you can go to the Graphisoft website, download and install the Goodies add-on, and then you'll have the Cinema 4D available to you as well. And then Revit RFA, which is the Revit object format, family format. You can download that from bim6x.com/store, and you can see there's actually version 23, 22, and it's not on here, but version 21 as well. And then those allow you to then import Revit objects and convert those into an Archicad .gsm object format. Now on the Twinmotion side, when we import in an object, it's not a BIM format, so it doesn't contain intelligent information. It's really more about the geometry. And so in that regard, we're typically using formats like FBX, SKP, which is SketchUp, Cinema 4D, OBJ, and then other types of formats like 3DS, DAE, DXF, and others. And when you go to import an object format into Twinmotion, one thing to be aware of is that there's a little options button down at the bottom corner down here. And that options button if you click it, will allow you to expand your your file formats options. So the file format options by default are these four above, which are these four that I just discussed. And the others, you can see, are quite a few others that you can expand and use as well. So if you have other formats you want to bring into Twinmotion, you will not initially be able to do that unless you click that options button and then select the other option here to import those other formats. Now, ModelPort is a plugin to Archicad as well. And ModelPort is kind of like a cross between the BIM formats that we just discussed in Archicad and the rendering formats that we are available in Twinmotion. So what ModelPort allows us to do is to expand those formats to include those rendering formats that would be available in Twinmotion, such as DAE, OBJ, FBX, 3DS, LXO, LWO, etc., and be able to access those formats, and then that enables you to bring those same sort of rendering type components and objects and models into Archicad directly, as opposed to just into Twinmotion or any other real-time rendering. So let's now discuss a little bit about the sources for objects. There's a lot of libraries on the internet. I'm not going to go through all of these today, but I am going to break them down to three parts: design libraries, BIM sources, and then also rendering focus type libraries. The first, design libraries, is one that we are all very familiar with. 3D Warehouse is a great resource for objects. It's free. It's one of the largest, if not the largest, warehouse library of objects on the net, and they're based on the SketchUp format. One of the things that a lot of people don't realize is it also allows you now to download any object off of the 3D Warehouse as also a Collada format, which is a DAE extension format. And that is basically an open format. And so that allows you to bring it in Archicad using the DAE as well. And I'll talk about that in more detail in a minute. So if you're not familiar with the DAE, it is a open asset or digital asset exchange format. It's been around for quite a while. But what's interesting to me is it has been adapted by the 3D Warehouse. And of course, you can also access all the various SketchUp formats. But what happens oftentimes in Archicad is that the current Archicad edition will be able to access maybe, I think it's 2018 right now, that it can open up in terms of a SketchUp format. And so let's say, for example, you're looking at a SketchUp file that is 2020 or 2019. Then you could also download the DAE or Collada format and open that and bring that in Archicad if Archicad will not recognize the most current version of the SketchUp format. SketchUp is typically are objects that are created by users and manufacturers, so you'll find kind of a combination of both within this library. But one thing that's really important to understand about the 3D Warehouse is that the quality will vary based upon the author's attention to detail. So, a good example you can kind of see here with this screenshot is that you'll a lot of times go to search for a chair or some specific thing you're looking for, and you'll have some that look great and others that look really kind of not too good. So it's going to vary. And again, this is because it's not a library that is monitored and managed by professionals. It's instead kind of an open user format, but it also has some others that are specific for that are actually done really well, that are developed by manufacturers or by specific collections they have. But you really need to be careful and be wary of the various levels of detail and quality. Now, with that said, there are libraries on the net that have amazing quality design objects. A really good one is Design Connected. If you've not used this before, they are a really fantastic resource. They have a huge amount of manufacturers and designers on there. They make amazing types of furniture and different types of products. And kind of like the SketchUp, they're kind of a combination of both free and paid content. Well, I shouldn't say like SketchUp. SketchUp is all, or the 3D Warehouse is all free content. But here you do have both free content and paid content. And so depending upon what you're looking for, you can download some really amazing stuff. But what's really important here, and very important distinguishing piece from some of the other libraries I'm going to talk about in a minute, is that every library part on Design Connected is actually designed internally and built internally by modelers that Design Connected has hired. So this is different from the 3D Warehouse or TurboSquid that I'll talk about in a second, where it's a multitude of different people on the net and around the world who build these things. This is actually very much controlled, and as a result, the objects are higher quality. They are, when you put them into Archicad, they're actually, you can download them in an Archicad format, and they're optimized to be faster and to work better. So it's a really, really good resource for you. Now, of course, you can pay per object, and as I mentioned, or you can get free objects as well. So it really just depends on what you're looking for. Now, on the BIM resources side, again, there's a multitude of different ones out there. I'm going to kind of focus on 4 specific parts here. First, for those of you who don't know, BIM Components is an Archicad object resource. It's actually contains only Archicad objects, specifically developed either by users, by Graphisoft, or by AEC Objects. I'm sorry, AEC, by BIMobjects.com. And so these are, and BIMobjects.com has manufacturer data as well. So there are a multitude of different objects available to you. You can also view these objects within your browser, your object browser in Archicad as well. There's also BIMobject.com. Now again, BIMobjects, as I mentioned, if it's an Archicad object, can be used directly within Archicad as well. You can even view some of these objects in the browser within Archicad. But BIMobject actually is a resource where they go out to manufacturers and they work with manufacturers to build objects for their products. And then they build those products or those objects based on formats that the manufacturer wants to make available. So some objects will have Archicad, Revit, SketchUp, and perhaps even other types of formats as well. While other objects within BIMobject will only have an Archicad format or only have a Revit format, etc. So it really is going to vary depending upon which one you pick. But it's a really great resource. Highly recommend it. Another one that I want to point out today that's it's been around for a while, but I've noticed that they're starting to change a little bit. This is BIMsmith Market. Now, BIMsmith was developed as a Revit library resource specifically. However, notice they have Archicad objects now. They have SketchUp objects. They have IFC objects. They're opening their format. They're starting to realize that the world is made up of more than just Revit, which is wonderful. And so you can go here and find a multitude of objects available in different formats. And what's important to understand too, here as well as with BIMobjects.com, is that even if you find objects that you want that are in Revit format, remember you can download the RFA plugin to Archicad from BIM6x.com, and therefore you can bring in any Revit object as well. So you really have a great resource here to use. But what I really like to see is the fact that they're starting to build a resource from Archicad objects or with Archicad objects as well. And then I'm not going to go into all the various levels of manufacturers out there, but just to kind of make a note, there are many manufacturers that have Revit objects, they have AutoCAD files, they have SketchUp files, they have Archicad files. So it's going to vary depending upon what manufacturer you go to. Again, in the majority, a lot of these manufacturers will have Revit files. not a big deal because you, with the RFA plugin, can bring in a Revit format and bring that right in Archicad. So that works really well with this. Now we also have rendering library sources that are, I should say object sources that are rendering focused. And what I mean by that is these are the types of libraries that are not meant, that are not, how should I put, they're not optimized, okay, for a BIM program. They're really good and they can definitely be used within your BIM application. And I would highly recommend that you do that depending upon what type of object it is, but you have to be careful. And I'm going to explain a little bit about that. So first off, TurboSquid, probably one of the probably is the largest resource of 3D objects on the web for rendering, specifically focused on rendering applications. And so it has an amazing database of professional 3D content. You'll see a lot of professional renderers, professional visualization type of people using stuff from here. And so you go and you search for things and you're going to find amazingly detailed components. I mean, you can kind of see here where you've got washers that is going to cost you, $44 for just that washer object, or $25 for that cappuccino maker. And that cappuccino maker looks like it's the absolute product that's being offered. And that's because someone has gone and built an amazing level of detail. So what you have to understand here is that if you download these, you're going to get a pretty substantial level of detail for this element. And oftentimes, something like a cappuccino maker, for example, if you were to put that into your BIM model, you're not building a cappuccino maker for a client. You're building a house or an office or a commercial project for a client, of which it might have a cappuccino maker, but you might not focus on that as part of your services. But maybe when you're doing your visualization and rendering, you want to have that because it's a very specific thing that they have in their house, you might add that. But you have to be careful about adding these into your BIM application because they can really slow down the application because of the complexity of the polygons within these objects. So that's why I say to be careful about some of these stuff some of these objects that come from from services that cater toward visualization and rendering services. And kind of like the SketchUp objects, they will vary. TurboSquid has, as I mentioned, a large and amazing database of objects, but they are objects that have been developed by a multitude of authors, oftentimes people who do visualization for a business and build objects for companies, for business, for products. And so then they'll make those products that they've developed, as like the cappuccino maker, and they will then sell that as an object on TurboSquid. So sometimes you'll get something that's amazingly detailed, and other times something that really is not done that well and doesn't have a lot of quality. So you just have to be careful of that. 3D Sky, different service, and a different business type offering. TurboSquid is you purchase by the product that you download. Here you have a subscription type business, and so you can therefore have a subscription, then download a certain amount of products or objects depending upon your subscription. And so you can have a pro version, which you can see in the blue there, which allows you to download a multitude of different things. You will also see that a lot of those objects are very, again, detailed. And that's because you've got different types of artists and professionals who are building these for companies like IKEA and various furniture manufacturers, where they're actually building these as products to then do renderings of for magazines, etc., and then they post them on here to sell. But they are amazing, and they are offered in a multitude of different 3D formats. But again, similar to the TurboSquid, and you do have free objects, as you can see, and you also have your Pro. There's just part of the subscription service. So once you've decided what object you're going to download, you download it for either Archicad or Twinmotion, or you use the ModelPort plugin as well. So let's say you're going to download an object and import in Archicad. So here's a good example where we've got this planar object. And what I mean by planar is that it doesn't have a whole lot of curves to it. It's pretty straightforward in terms of having just simple surfaces. And so therefore, when you bring it into Archicad, the 2D symbol that it creates for our plan view looks really great. Our 3D view of this object looks really good. And so that's all fine. But what can happen also is something that looks very simple, like this cabinet, Kohler cabinet from the 3D warehouse. When it gets imported into Archicad, all of a sudden that curve sink or the curvature of the tap, the sink there, and the handles for the hot and cold water, all of a sudden become extremely triangulated because of the polygons. And that's what happens in Archicad. Anytime you bring in an object that you've imported and has a lot of curves to it, it can oftentimes turn into a triangulated type surface. And so you get this very this triangulated view for your 2D symbol and also in 3D. So the other issue is that if you want to edit this object in terms of its materials, it's really very limited. So if I open the settings of this object in Archicad for this Kohler object, we're going to see that we can edit the rotation, we can edit the scaling, and we can edit the hotspots. That does not really help me in terms of being able to edit the material for the cabinet or the counter or the sink or the taps. None of that is available for me to edit when I import it into Archicad. And the other option I have is to convert that object, which many people do, into a morph, because that then allows you to actually edit the individual materials. So that can work, but there are a couple things you need to be aware of. First off, if that object has a lot of polygons to it, means it has curves to it, right? Then, depending upon the number of curves, the number of polygons, it can really cause your model to slow down, particularly if you've got a lot of them. And you can see this kind of warning up here in the upper right. That's what you'll see oftentimes anytime you convert an object or an element into a morph. It's going to tell you, if it has a lot of polygons to it, that you may want to think a little bit about that, because it may create a lot of complexity to your model and slow down your model. The other problem is that if you want to change the materials for morphs, it's not as simple as just kind of selecting the object and changing the material. The morph is basically a collection of surfaces, kind of like SketchUp. And so you have to select the individual surfaces in order to change the materials. And so that can be very cumbersome, as you can kind of see here, where you're selecting one surface and then going over and changing that. You have to keep going around and around. And it's not so bad for the cabinet here, but when we start getting to all the individual trim and pieces, really can get very complex, and just it's not the easiest thing in the world to do. So it kind of gets to be a little tedious. Now, one of the things you can do to kind of help yourself with this is you can use an add-on to Archicad called ModelPort. ModelPort's a fantastic application. What it does is it allows you to edit those objects and to manage those objects. We actually have this on our website at archvista.com/ModelPort. And if you want to kind of look at what it does compared to Archicad, I'm going to give you a little bit of a brief overview of this today, but there's a lot more to it. And that is, if you go to the website and go to this page, very bottom of it, there's a chart. It shows you what ModelPort does for in terms of those feature sets, and what the feature sets would be compared to if you were to just use the native workflow of Archicad in terms of bringing in objects. Okay, so what it adds to the workflow and some of the problems that it solves. So first, probably one of the major things that it does is it takes the 2D symbols and it converts it into a clean 2D and 3D graphic. And so this is really important, because you can see here where here's our SketchUp object that we brought in using a SketchUp format. Here's the DAE, similar type thing, right? And you can see between both of these, you just have this kind of issue, this triangulation going on. But the ModelPort format is nice and clean. And then additionally, we can also in 3D see, how much cleaner it is as well. It gets rid of a lot of those lines, it gets rid of a lot of the triangulation, just makes it a lot cleaner in terms of the way that it works and looks. In regards to the also once it comes in, not only can we then be able to have a cleaner format, we can even edit the color, the fill pattern, the way we want that symbol to look in 2D. And this is really important because that's one of the things that is an issue whenever you bring an object into Archicad using its native process. It does not allow you to edit the 2D symbol of that object very easily, and it does not allow you to edit the material of that very easily. And this is one of the things that ModelPort does allow you to do. Another issue, oftentimes when you bring in objects from other sources, particularly like sources like TurboSquid, SketchUp, 3D Warehouse, and others, where they're basically authors that are not professionals that have been hired to create these parts, but actually people are just kind of creating as part of their workflow of what they do as a business. Oftentimes they'll upload these objects and they'll have other elements in there that you don't want. So as a good example, here's an object, a sort of a light bulb kind of piece that you want to bring in and use for a project. And of course, someone forgot to turn off the rendering here. That is the edge that they used to create this to the side of it. So if I were to bring that directly into Archicad, I would have to explode this into a morph, then delete this. Now my object's no longer an object, it's now a morph, so I'm gonna have to go back to the process of resaving it, and there's just all these different things that you have to do to get back to the step of actually using it as an object. And you have, again, the limited ability to be able to edit it. So here, what I can do is it actually gives the ability to turn on and off the element. So I can select that element, I can go over, click the little eye, and the visibility now is off. So that's a big important aspect of ModelPort because it allows you to really control the visibility of elements inside of an object that you've imported. Also, the ability to select elements within as material. So here, an object I brought in, yet I can go in and individually select each material, whether that's the bedspread color, whether that's the fabric at the end of the bed, or the pillows, the headboard material, or the side. Any one of those elements I can go in and select and be able to edit. Huge difference between having to import an object in Archicad and then taking it and exploding it into an individual element or morph. Also, it gives you the ability to control everything from textures to color and transparencies, all kinds of properties. Really important because when you bring these elements in from other sources, oftentimes the transparencies or the colors, the textures may be different from what you want. And to have to actually go and turn that into a morph to try to control it is really cumbersome. So here, within the tool, you're able to control that all within Archicad. And one of the biggest issues I see with any objects you bring in external that are not native Archicad objects is the polygon count. So this is a great example. Okay, this is a chair. Actually, I have this chair in my home. And on the left-hand side is the polygon count of this object. It is over 100,000 polygons for just that single chair. Okay, that is really out of control for a single object. So on the right side, we're going to see what ModelPort does, because ModelPort will allow me to reduce that. So I can open up ModelPort, I select this chair, okay, and then it's going to allow me to actually go and reduce the polygon count. And first, before I show you how to do that, I want you to see that whenever you open an object and import an object, you'll see a bar here, okay, that is showing you whether or not this object has a low polygon count or a high polygon count. So as you can see down here in the green, is that if it's down here in the green, then the object is good. It's got a low polygon count. In the middle, well, it's starting to get a little high, but it's probably okay. If it starts to get in the red zone, like this one is, definitely something you need to think about. So what we can do now is we can reduce this polygon count. So the way that we're going to do that is we're going to select the object, and down toward the bottom of it, of this dialog, you can actually change from normal to poly reduced. And then we can begin to reduce what's called decimate, if you will. Right now you'll see that it's reduced by 38%. Because now we're going to take it down another couple steps, down to maybe 61%, or up, I should say. So depending upon how you want to go, you want to reduce it down, or you want to reduce it up. And you can see with each one of those, it still looks just fine. And so now we're going to go ahead and say yes. And now it's reduced that object and allowed us to change that, or reduce the polygon count for it. And then now if we look at this in 3D, we're going to see that this particular object doesn't look that much different than the original object, but the reduction difference, this is only 25% of what the original object was. So this is only about 25,000 polygons as opposed to over 100,000 polygons. So huge, huge difference. And then finally, there's also a ModelPort format. This allows your objects to be a lot less in size. So for example, the same object is 13 megabytes in the normal GDL format in Archicad. If we change it to the ModelPort format and update that, it's like a compressor. It compresses this object down, so again, reduces your file size, right? And so now if we go down and take a look at this format size, we'll see it's only 2.1 megabytes. Big difference. I went from 13 down to 2.1. So we're seeing upwards of 80% reduction in the file size. That is huge when you talk about the size of these objects. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about how we import those objects to Twinmotion. So again, your objects can either be imported in Archicad natively and then used there, imported in Archicad using an add-on like ModelPort to help you manage those objects better, or you can take objects and you can just import them directly to Twinmotion. Now, why would you do that versus Archicad? Well, sometimes you don't need, like maybe it's landscaping for trees, maybe it's a piece of furniture, or in this case a barbecue grill. It's just not that important to you to have that in the Archicad model. So you're like, okay, I'll just bring this directly into my Twinmotion model. Maybe you're talking to the client, you don't want to go back and edit your Archicad model, you're just going to add that barbecue in. So the way that you add a object into Twinmotion is you're going to go down to the bottom of your Twinmotion on the bottom left, select the import option here button, and then it'll show your import screen. You'll click the plus, it'll bring up a dialog in the background. You'll click geometry, you'll go open, and then you'll go down here and select the file. Again, if you click the options, you can change it from the standard 4 formats to other formats as well. Here we're going to use a DAE format to import in. Now, once we import that in, that object will appear at its project origin, wherever it was created at. And oftentimes, depending upon your project, you may have to turn off all of your model and turn on only the object in order to move it out from wherever that project origin was, because oftentimes you don't know where these objects' origin was created, and then move that to a location that you can grab and then move to wherever you need it to be as a final object. So as a good example, over on the right here, this is our list of layers, okay? And so this is really important for you to remember. Whenever you have an object you've imported, very, very good chance it's going to have a multitude of different layers that are part of that object. When it comes in, if you want to move that object as a whole, you need to select the top part of this object. So in other words, in this object, it's kind of listing it as, these are what are called containers in Twinmotion. Basically, folders, the word for folders, right? So there's a container. So this folder or container has all the various layers and parts of this object within it. if I have this handle selected while I'm trying to move this object, it's not going to move the object. It's going to move that one handle. So if you want to move the object as a whole, make sure to select this top part of the object so it selects the entire container, not just the individual parts. Once you've done that, you'll see there is a move option here. I'm not going to go through all this today, but in essence, the arrow here, if I select it, will become highlighted. I can move it up or down. If I select the arrow on the side, I can move left to right. And if I move the one over here, I can move back and forth. So this is a really nice way of moving it. And of course, I can rotate it, move it, and rotate it, etc. And then once it's in position, or before, I guess, you can begin to edit it in terms of its material. So as an example, this originally came in as stone. So if I want to change this from stone to match the concrete behind it, I could use my little eyedropper, click on the concrete behind to get that concrete, drag that concrete right on to what was a stone and change the stone to concrete. If I wanted to change the handles right here, maybe to be black rather than be steel or aluminum, I can basically select that handle right here. So it then highlights all the elements that are that material. And then click my color button. And then open up the colors and then change the colors as I would like them to be. Okay, everybody, thank you everybody for attending today. If you have any questions, go ahead and please enter those into the Q&A, our questions panel there in the GoToWebinar control panel. And I will review those in just a second. If you have any questions for me, my email and phone number is there. Also, if you're more interested in ModelPort and learning more about how that can help you in Archicad and with objects, the address is there for learning more about ModelPort. Also, if you're new to Archicad, there is the Archicad trial that you can download. There's the link for that, and there's also education, both for Graphisoft and on Learn Virtual. We do have education for Learn Virtual every Monday. We have a session very similar to today, where we review a topic and then we take questions and answers after live. And we have many people on who come on just to learn, to ask questions and try to figure out how to do things in Archicad. So that is every Monday. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and take questions.